We're really excited to have with us today our first guest, Mr. Paul Petherbridge. Paul has worked for LifeHealthcare Australia and New Zealand now for in excess of 15 years. He currently sits in the Chief Executive Officer position and was appointed at the start of the year to lead and drive the group. The group has been on quite a transformational journey over the last few years, most recently being acquired by EBOS Group, and have enjoyed significant expansion into the Asia-Pacific region through Transmedic. Really excited to have Paul share with us today his thoughts on leadership, how the medical device market is evolving and changing over the next few years into the future, and also discussing some of those bold decisions that are changing the face of the healthcare landscape here within Australia and New Zealand. Let's dive straight in. You've had an interesting career. You've worked now, as I say, in medical devices for coming up to 20 years. What many people may not know about you is you actually started your career in Coca-Cola in the FMCG space. What first drew you to the medical device space, and what has kept you so energized over the years?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having us. It's great to be here. I guess what drew me to medical devices and the space in the MedTech industry largely was, I guess, its purpose and what we all strive to achieve here in the MedTech industry. It's really around, for me, growing up, I was really passionate about human movement, played a lot of sport.
Yeah.
As you get older, you still want to play sport. You don't move as well. And I guess there's an interest around it, right? And just naturally, I had an interest in the space. I had friends that had worked in MedTech. It was an interesting space to look into. And I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to get an opportunity with a distributor back then, taking a chance on a guy coming from FMCG, which was really a great grounding for sales because you had to work with diverse type of different backgrounds, different cultures, people that English wasn't their first language. So it was a really good place to cut your teeth, so to speak. But MedTech, its purpose around making life better for people, bringing in technology that's really focused around the ANZ market was something that was really exciting and continues to be exciting, right?
Yeah.
It's an area that transforms continuously, and there's innovation in the space continuously. I don't think we've got the answers for everything, but we're all turning up every day with that level of passion to make it better for the patient ultimately on the table.
Absolutely. And I'm sure many of our listeners would probably be able to relate to that. I think one of the commonalities with people that I've worked with over the years, people that we speak to on a day-to-day basis, is that mission, is that purpose, which I think is so unique in medical devices compared to so many other industries. What would you identify as perhaps the biggest changes that you've seen in the industry from when you first came into it 20 years ago to what it looks like today? Yeah,
I mean, it's a good question. There's been a lot of change when you reflect on the industry I walked into over 20 years ago now. But the change is really the technology. I think the enabling technology space has transformed a lot, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. I think with the technology that's coming in to assist surgeons, with more accurate placement of implants, making surgery more efficient, faster, more reproducible, tightening the bell curve of results. That, for me, is probably the biggest transformation we've seen in 20 years. Different therapeutic spaces have had real advancements in the implants themselves. Others maybe not as much, like orthopedics, but certainly spine, neurovascular is a space that continues to change drastically and evolve very quickly. So it changes a little bit from therapeutic space to therapeutic space, but enabling tech is probably the big thing overarching all of it. We've seen the Da Vinci rise and all different types of robotic platforms that are now so common in surgical theatres across the country.
Absolutely. And many people may not realise that LifeHealthcare, as I say, are a distributor. So at its heart, you don't necessarily as a business manufacture products. You represent some of the world's leading brands in the market. Given, the evolution of things like enabling technology, introduction of AI-based software as well for surgical planning, how as a business do you remain at the forefront and stay ahead of the curve in like what you say is a fast evolving climate?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. I think for us, I think we're in a really unique position. So we're one of very few companies can really talk about genuinely wanting to make an impact in Australia and New Zealand. I think it's harder as a multinational to do that because we make decisions based on our customer base here. And every healthcare market in the world is slightly different based off training, resource, funding, payer models, they're all different. So I definitely do think that we have an advantage in that space, but also our scale. We're one of the larger distributors now in the MedTech space, as you pointed out. So we do have a lot of these, I guess, early enabling tech organizations that are getting started up that want to come to Australia and want to come to New Zealand because the entry is attractive, the KOLs they get to work with is attractive, and often if they're in a therapeutic space that we are market share leaders in or high in the market share leadership board, they definitely engage with us to help launch their technology, because it's harder with the bigger multinational to do that because they've obviously got their own platforms. So I feel like we are in a really fortunate position where a lot of that technology comes to us now because of who we are and the size we are and what we represent in those therapeutic spaces.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And Life Healthcare, I think is fair to say, has been on quite an incredible journey, obviously, since you joined the business sort of 15 years or so ago. How would you describe the current chapter, under EBOS and their ownership, and what are the biggest opportunities you as a business are focused on now?
Yeah, it's been a pretty incredible journey. We Rachel and I are working on currently the kind of company kickoff meeting at the end of July, and it's often a very good time to reflect on the year that was, but also the journey you've been through. And we were a small private equity-backed business back in 2006. I joined in 2010, and then we went public not that long after. So we were on the ASX, and then we were acquired by Pacific Equity Partners, which really transformed our business. But I guess the whole way along, every change on the organisation there's been real positives to it. And then our final home being EBOS. The real positive with that for me is when we went from that transition from Pacific Equity Partners to who the eventual buyer would be, I was really hoping for someone that was Australia and New Zealand based. Okay. Because someone that's Australia and New Zealand based knows the market and cares about the market. When you have an overseas buyer, it's not to say they won't, but it's maybe a different agenda. So we were lucky and fortunate that EBOS saw us as an attractive business to get involved in at a MedTech level. And they really focus on Australia and New Zealand. They're dual listed. So the opportunities for us is to really, take that organisational juggernaut that is EBOS. It's a huge business in multiple parts of healthcare and now investing into MedTech. We're fortunate that Matt Musio, so the former CEO of LHC, is on the board for EBOS. So that really shows the intention, for EBOS to really double down in MedTech. So we are seeing the investment come our way. So it is exciting. You've got a big backer that wants to see you be successful, someone that cares about our local market. I mean, the first time really EBOS sort of ventured offshore was because of us with Transmedic, our sister company up in Southeast Asia. So they've really kept it close to home, which for me is a real positive.
And just touching on the Transmedic piece, Paul, again, there may be people that are listening to this that aren't familiar with the Transmedic arm to the business. What initially drove that expansion into APAC, and where do you see, the APAC region, and how do you see it developing over the next few years? Yeah,
so I think Asia Pacific, and if you take Southeast Asia specifically in terms of that region, the countries we're in up there now, sort of 9 in that region, there's a real rise in the middle class, right? If you think about Indonesia, obviously Singapore's a very strong market, Malaysia's growing. And then the population size is huge when we think about it in comparison to Australia and New Zealand. So that makes it really attractive, and the investment into healthcare makes it attractive. The region itself, being close to us with surgical training, means you can really find synergies in professional education and getting KOLs to connect. Allowed us to really then also think about therapeutic spaces we're in, and there was a lot of synergies there too. They're very strong in spine, we were orthopedics, etc. So there was synergies from a therapeutic space as well, which then made it more attractive for suppliers. Because if you think about, if you're a US-based business or a European-based business, Asia, when you think about Asia generally, if we put it all together, it's quite complex. Various different regulatory bodies, different pricing markets. It makes it really challenging to think about which markets to go into. It's a lot of work. Versus if you can come to a group like EBOS MedTech, which we've formed, which is a series of companies, LifeHealthcare being one and Transmedic being another, it really allows you to work with one organisation that understands all those markets and can help you launch products, get into the market, but not just one spot, numerous spots where it makes sense. So that's what's led us to, I guess, working with Transmedic and being a part of that journey with them together. So it's been a really good partnership, and we continue to get closer. Christine James stepping back into the CEO role that was formerly a LifeHealthcare team member and then moved up to Transmedic in the CEO role there. I mean, naturally by her moving into the EBOS MedTech CEO position really brings that all together really nicely, I think. So it's been a really good journey working with them.
And on a personal level as well, from your perspective in your career, having exposure, to these opportunities, and you can see how acquisitions are made, and ultimately now as CEO, you take on a lot of responsibility for the decisions that you make. How has your sort of leadership approach and philosophy, I suppose, changed over the years, given all of the changes that are happening internally?
I don't know if there's been a huge change in my philosophy. I think the first thing you want is you want a team of individuals that are passionate about the sector. You can't teach passion, I don't think, and grit and resilience. Second thing, if you find that in the team that you have, I think you're a long way to being successful, because you can teach people a therapeutic space.
Yes, yeah.
And there's a lot of change in our sector, and there's a lot of change in Asia Pacific, particularly, and other markets as well, particularly in Australia as well. So that's probably the first bit in terms of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of the philosophy around leadership, I'm fortunate enough to be part of the EBOS MedTech leadership team. So we obviously have the leaders from like Australian Biotechnologies, locally with Cryomed in aesthetics, Transmedic, myself. And so we share ideas. So there's a huge amount of experience. There's hundreds of years of experience in that team, and we get to share all that together and make decisions together about what either therapeutic spaces we want to expand into. Do we want to go deeper into channels we're already in? Contract manufacturing, all sorts of ideas that get thrown up at that point, which is really nice because you can cut your own path, I guess, in terms of where you want to take the organisation.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously you've led through some quite significant organisational change. You've obviously had people that have joined LifeHealthcare and know the business as LifeHealthcare, so you almost have that legacy culture that sits within LifeHealthcare. We oftentimes see when there are big acquisitions that can sometimes shift. How are you able, or how have you been able to, lead through significant organizational change whilst also keeping people engaged and valued through that journey?
Yeah. So good question again. That change, whether it's change, big organizational change, or whether the business is really stable, we should go through different periods. I think the most important thing is being transparent with your team and your organization at large. So LifeHealthcare is north of 400 people. We do monthly calls with the whole organisation, and we be transparent about where we are on certain, whether it's company priorities or things you're trying to achieve. I think that's the most important thing, being upfront with the organisation where you may or may have not got things right, and then leaning on the organisation, all those people that you have to come up with ideas to solve for problems. There's a lot of smart people that work at LifeHealthcare. And so as leaders, you really want to make sure that you're engaging your team to help and create a culture of solutions. It's not about someone at the top making a decision and then flowing it down. It's actually a lot of the time it comes from the team that you're working with to come up with those solutions. So I think it's trying to cultivate that culture of innovation and that culture of being agile, even though you become bigger, and naturally it's more difficult to be as agile as you were when you had 50 employees, but still trying to keep that agility culture within the organisation so we can adapt to change, and we set ourselves up for it. And we've done that with our integration team, whether it's technology or businesses. They're the same people running the same thing every time. So you get a bit of a skill set and capability as well, which helps.
Yeah, no, indeed. And obviously, 15 years with one business, that's a significant period of time. Almost the attitudes of people entering the workforce now is perhaps you look to stay with the business maybe for 3 or 4 years, then make a change. What has kept you within LifeHealthcare for those 15 years? And I suppose an adjunct to that as well is how do you drive retention within a business? Because talent acquisition in terms of going to market and attracting people is a challenge. But I think conversely, so is actually keeping people motivated in a business as well, and making them feel valued, that there is a career journey and plan ahead of them. If you reflect on your time at LifeHealthcare, like I say, what has kept you within the business for so many years, and how do you drive that loyalty as well within your teams?
Yeah, for me, I'm unashamedly a guy that loves distribution. I love our customer base and finding solutions for our customer base first and foremost. So that is something that is, in my mind, at least when I rationalize it, easier to do in a distribution model. We can take a large number of different solutions, put it together and provide a unique solution that's purpose-built for our market. And I think that resonates with the surgeon customer base, particularly the younger generation. They want that solution focus. So for us, in a distribution model, and then you have scale like LifeHealthcare, that becomes easier. In terms of your second part of that question around talent retention, for me, I've spoken about this a little bit before. Talent isn't a conversation that happens once a year. We put a person on a 9-box grid and that's kind of it. Talent for us at LifeHealthcare is a conversation that happens every 6 weeks.
Okay.
And you look at your top performing talent, you look at all your talent, and it's a conversation with your leaders you have all the time. And what I found by doing that, the more you do it, the more it becomes a natural conversation, the faster you work through things to then progress people in their career. So everyone has a development plan. And everyone talks about it regularly. So it's not something that you then revisit and sort of dust off at the end of the year and think, what did we achieve? It's kind of constant. And so I think people value that because they can see it happening. We invest a huge amount into learning and development for our leaders and just generally our organisation. That's been really helpful. And I think if you think about the group more broadly outside of LifeHealthcare, there's talent mobility and opportunities there as well. So there isn't, for people, if you wanted to work in Singapore, you have that opportunity in the MedTech group. If you want to work at LifeHealthcare or in aesthetics with Cryomed or at AusBio, there is talent mobility opportunities, and particularly as leaders of those businesses, we often talk about it. If someone has a role coming up, whether it's in product marketing or whatever it may be, we often reach out to each other and want to help lift internally first before you go external. And sometimes, a lot of the time you still need to go external with people like OneMDx and others to help attract talent as well. But I think that's probably part of the key to our success is making it a regular conversation all the time. Yeah,
and having that proactive approach as well. I think as we comment on as a business, I think recruiting and identifying talent within medical devices is arguably harder now than when it was when we first started the business 5 years or so ago. Don't necessarily know why that is the case. I think there's options for people that have medical device sales experience, not just within sales, but can use that experience to go into other markets. But, as an organization within medical devices, retaining that key talent is just so important. And it's an interesting conversation that we have with our clients almost on a daily basis, because as I say, it is becoming ever so challenging to bring in new talent from outside of the business. And when you are looking to hire, externally or even, within the business, how do you determine whether somebody is going to thrive within, the medical device industry and environment? And what are the key things that you've always sort of looked for when looking to bring in people into your team, or at least move people into new opportunities within the business?
So I think comes back to those 2 points initially. I was asked this question years ago by someone who still works for our business today, was what makes a successful representative in MedTech? And my answer at that time was passion. It's still the same. If you're passionate about the sector in terms of what you're trying to achieve in that therapeutic space, like if you're passionate about neurosurgery or if you're passionate about cardiac surgery and that's your thing and there's a reason for it, that is a big way to being successful, because I think customers see it, your passion in that space. Absolutely. And you'll go above and beyond naturally because that's just what you'll do. Then there's the grit resilient bit. We know what it's like to be knocked back, and you get knocked back a lot in this. And I think that's the nature of any business within commercial sales anywhere in any industry. You've got to be able to take that hit and get up and go again and go again. And I think that's part of it. We often rely on recruiters like yourself on talent as well, in terms of what they're seeing in the market. So, but if I was going to come back to it, I think it's those two real features that I look for in any of my teams. You've got to be really passionate about what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. And that goes even into support services, right? Like when you think about if you're working in operations, you want loan kit technicians to be passionate about thinking about the patient on the table, getting it right every time. And I think we have that culture at LifeHealthcare within our teams, generally speaking. People know the purpose of our organisation, trying to make life better for others. And everyone turns up to work every day with that kind of ethos about what we're trying to achieve. And we're lucky because we get to launch lots of technologies every year that try to achieve the panacea.
Yes.
Nice thing about the panacea is it's really hard to get there, but it is something we try to achieve. So I think people generally gravitate towards that because it means something.
No, indeed. And as a business, obviously, you've spent many years in spine, before taking on leadership roles within Life Healthcare at a more holistic level. The spine industry is its own beast in its own right, with its own nuances and demands placed on salespeople and operational people. Now sitting holistically, within the market or within the business in the CEO role, how different, does one individual product area differ from the next, and does that influence what the profile mix of a potential candidate looks like working for one particular business within Life Healthcare to the next?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think generally speaking, no. I think if you work within MedTech and you work within implant spaces, I think there can be transferable. I always liken it to there's implant spaces that are very grey, and what I mean by that is there's very different ways to do things.
Yeah.
So if we think about spine, there's multiple different approaches to the same type. That's that old saying, you send a patient to a spine surgeon or 9 spine surgeons, you'll get 9 different opinions for that, but they're all trying to achieve the same outcome. And I think that's very true in spine. So it makes it a longer journey to learn. I think in orthopedics, if we take total joints, primary hip and knee, they've probably reached a level where the results are generally excellent for a long period of time. So it's a different type of the results are very predictable. The outcomes, the surgery time, which is good. And then neurovascular base is probably the next evolution from spine, right? It's continually evolving almost every year, doing first in man studies constantly. The type of candidate, it probably does a little bit. Those more grey-based implant channels is looking for different solutions tend to be people very science-based in my teams. If I think of it now, we've got PhD-based people in those teams, people that are either got medical-based, science-based degrees, physios, all those type of people. And then I guess as we drift more towards orthopedics and other channels like that, they tend to be people that probably are a bit more extroverted as well. They're a bit more sports orientated. So it probably does a little bit influence the way you think about different people in different channels. But I think if you're turning up with that same purpose in mind, you can work in multiple different areas. Yeah,
no, indeed. And given that Life Healthcare do now operate across such a broad product range, from spine, like you say, neurovascular, plastics, imaging, it's a broad space. How do you prioritize as a business when you are looking to either acquire a new organization, bring it into the Life Healthcare family, or invest in a market segment that you might not historically have had a presence? How do you go through that process? What does that look like?
It's a bit of a secret sauce.
I know. Yeah, that's true.
How do we look at it? Firstly, we've got a really solid upstream BD team that thinks about different markets. We often map the market over and over again across Australia, New Zealand, then Southeast Asia.
Okay.
What we try to look for is therapeutic spaces that are attractive across multiple markets, not just Australia, New Zealand, but Southeast Asia as well. We learn from each other because there's things that Chris and her team in Transmedic are doing slightly different to what we do. So we see what's applicable across different markets. And then you look at the growth segments, right? I mean, we know MedTech in the Asia-Pac region's about 8.5% CAGR versus globally 6%. So it's a strong growing market. But different markets are different and different countries are different. So what we then want to make sure we're doing is if we're going to invest into an asset, into a particular therapeutic space, you want to make sure that it's a good, robust business. Culture is key. Like they've got to match the Life Healthcare culture. They've got to have that same entrepreneurial type spirit, be passionate about the space, which a lot of them are, because they're family-owned businesses in some instances. And, big key foundation suppliers that you can work long-term with that have innovation aspirations. Right. So they're kind of the things we look for in those businesses, but it is a lot of work. You probably, as you go and map the market, you're looking at hundreds of different businesses in multiple different, not just therapeutic spaces, but medical technology spaces. So it's a lot of work before you get down to maybe 3 or 4 that you genuinely want to engage with.
And I guess that, like you touched on earlier, the business is at that point now where you're probably receiving, inquiries from all sorts of companies globally.
Yep.
And that's probably something that I would imagine has evolved quite significantly over the last 10 to 15 years as the business has evolved and got bigger.
Suppliers coming to us, or even businesses coming to us wanting to take on certain channels. And that goes back to that original point around the bigger multinationals looking at the US and focusing on markets like that. And we've seen it in Southeast Asia where they've exited various therapeutic spaces in different portfolios. And that's been a real advantage for us because we're based there, and it allows us to work with those bigger multinationals in those therapeutic spaces in those markets because we're there.
Yes.
We can do the reverse logistics. We can do all the billing. We can engage the sessions. We can do the professional education. We're end to end.
Yeah.
So I think that also helps because the regulatory environment, whilst people talk about it becoming more global, to some aspect it is quite divided now with the US and Europe. So that also has an impact for us down here. It has an impact for Southeast Asia and the businesses you want to try to work with and engage.
And something you touched on earlier, Paul, I mean, your love for the distribution space is clear. It's what perhaps has kept you, within this space for so many years. We speak to a lot of people that have perhaps worked for tier one multinationals for many, many years. They're used to working for a manufacturer. We present the notion of maybe working for a distributor. And as I say, sometimes there is perhaps a lack of understanding as to the key differences between working for one type of business to the next. What advice would you give to somebody perhaps that is looking to transition from a manufacturer, global business, to perhaps more of a smaller, medium-sized organization that plays in that distribution space? What do they need to be prepared to see, and what would those changes typically look like, do you think?
Yeah, so if you're a candidate looking at that change, I think the first thing you want to think about is that business's position within that market and their market share. Understanding, is that a business that is growing and taking share? Often they're the ones that are kind of the up-and-comers that people look at a lot. You would want to have conversations around what their agreements look like. I know for us at LifeHealthcare, everything's sort of long-term. If we're going to go into a space, and because the investment cycle is so long, they're long-term agreements. So we have a lot of stability. And I know that the concern always with the distributor from times gone past is, but any one day that could be gone. And if you look at
get that a lot, that happens.
But if you look at the LifeHealthcare growth and the suppliers we've had, they've been with us for years, decades in a lot of instances, and still are there. So I would encourage people to look at that first and then look at how that business is performing in that space. And if you are one of those people that want to work in a really agile business, fast decision-making, really customer-centric, where you can actually make decisions to improve a surgeon's workflow, because you can offer different technology and put things together. I think that's what attracts people to distribution, I think, for at least for me. And I think that resonates through the business as well.
We're seeing a bit of a shift in the market in terms of, the rise in perhaps independent sales agent agreements, or indeed manufacturers that perhaps have never worked with a local distributor actually exploring those avenues. Do you think that will continue to evolve over the next few years? Do you think there will be perhaps a preference for maybe the larger organizations to be working closely with companies like LifeHealthcare, whereas maybe historically they haven't taken that route, they've gone direct themselves?
Interesting concept. I think that within that scenario, if you're a business that wants to aspire to, Australia's a big geographical location, and there's a lot within the logistics space supporting lots of hospitals, lots of regional. If you've got ambition to be a decent player in the market, you have to consider businesses like LifeHealthcare because they've got the reach. If you're looking to just work with sort of smaller agent-based businesses, I think you're sort of limiting yourself to, you made a decision that maybe you don't want to compete with the tier one brands, that you're happy to take a very small segment of the market with very strong relationships in a certain part of the country, and that's kind of where you are. But I think most businesses got more of that aspiration. We tend to work with ones that are investing in being innovative, so they want to see more than just a pocket of success. They want national success, national market share. They want to see KOL engagement. They want to bring people into their head offices overseas to really help them launch into other markets as well. They're the type of businesses we tend to work with.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. And We touched on staying ahead of the curve in MedTech is a challenge as a medical device business. You're facing challenges on all fronts, whether it be supply chain, geographical challenges, geopolitical challenges. Obviously, there's a lot happening in the wider world right now. In terms of the future, for the industry and obviously for LifeHealthcare, what do you see the next 5 years looking like from an industry perspective, but then also from a LifeHealthcare perspective?
So from an industry perspective, or just even which flows into, I guess, LifeHealthcare, I think you'd be naive to not think that AI is not a big player. I think we use that term pretty loosely in AI. Yeah. So if I was going to expand on that technology generally, but if we're going to talk about AI more specifically, it's not just about the technology in the hospital that you use or the implant system or whatever that may be. I think it's how you deliver to the customer, how you engage with the customer, how they can provide you feedback. And data will be the thing. There's no question in Australia particularly. It's in the news every day, right? Whether it's health insurers, hospitals, payers, there's constant talk around value. And we've got a great healthcare system in Australia. And I think everyone wants to get to the table to make sure that we're sustainable about how we do that. But I think AI will play a big part of that and the data collection, whether it's surgical outcomes, sharing of data, and how that all rolls up. I think is going to become an increasingly important part of what we do. And you can see it from the enabling technology platforms that are coming out in various therapeutic spaces, data collection of the surgical technique, the efficiency of that surgical technique, then the patient outcome, alignment. They're all things that are now, if you don't have it, you need it. It's kind of like GPS within a car. Yeah. And so I think that's what's going to drive reimbursement. And if that's what drives reimbursement, that'll drive investment. If that drives investment, that'll drive innovation. So I think all those things will impact our industry because I don't think it's necessarily about the technology just in the theatre now. Bigger companies are making investments into spaces around data collection, right? Yeah. I don't think anyone's quite got it worked out, but they know that's the thing. That's the asset that you need because data will drive decision-making.
Right. And am I right in thinking LifeHealthcare recently made an acquisition in that space? Is it Proprio?
So Proprio, we're distributing a product, Proprio, and Proprio sort of is in the spine space, but we'll broaden out from a navigation platform. But it is AI-based, got technology which is collecting, surgical workflow, providing real-life feedback to surgeons in that space. So it is a really nice platform for that, but we're seeing that increasingly across lots of companies that we're working with. That's the thing. I think a lot of people use that term really loosely, AI, I do think there's lots of companies that are investing into that space and something we're looking at. And we're also looking at it from just a support service perspective. How do you make your operations team have a more engaged, enjoyable experience where getting systems out of your warehouse is not hours but minutes, and that becomes a technology play. And if you can start doing things like that, I think for our organisation, you have much higher engaged team members. It's about trying to do more with the same team you have as opposed to more with less.
What do you anticipate to be, I suppose, the limitations placed on medical device companies to be able to, invest in these technologies and get them off the ground quickly? Because medical devices, maybe compared to other segments, it's innovative, but it can move far slower. Yeah. What do you envisage to be those limitations?
So on what's nice is on the customer engagement perspective. So if you think about everything you can do back of house to engage your customer, I think that can move really quickly, and that's what we're looking at. Regulatory approval is always the thing that slows everything down. And with the MDR changes and, FDA kind of pulling back into the US and how Australia's TGA views all this much more stringently than probably a lot of other markets, I think regulatory slows that part down. I don't think there's any lack of wanting to invest in innovation. We go to a lot of the investor conferences and startup conferences with businesses that are looking to get seed capital in to launch technology, and there's plenty of them working in MedTech still. And so everyone sees the value there. I think it is the regulatory burden that slows it down for our local markets generally. But from a customer engagement point of view, the other half of the business, which is just as important, I think you can speed that up and do more in that space.
And from what you've seen so far, what is the appetite of the customers to be looking at technologies and enabling tech, particularly in industries perhaps like spine or orthopedics that can take a little bit of time to, get the customer sort of bought into a particular philosophy or journey. What has been your experience so far in the reception or the response to these types of products and technology from the customer group?
Definitely an exponential curve.
Really?
Like the engagement continues to rise, and I think it rises at a faster and faster rate every year. We see it in orthopedics, robotics, spine, similar story.
Yeah.
It was a very slow journey at the beginning, like
Yes.
all these things. It's kind of like navigation, don't really need it. Now
Right.
everyone has it. So I think there's no question that across most implant therapeutic spaces where you're dealing in either around the nervous system or big joints, neurosurgery and cranial neurovascular surgery, I think this kind of evolution of enabling tech and engagement on it is without a doubt an exponential curve. More and more customers, more and more surgeons are engaging on it because they see the value in it. And I think also companies are investing it too, right? And we're getting it better and better every time. And it's adding more value. And as soon as you get to a point, that inflection point between the cost of it and the value add, and the value add being more than the cost,
yes,
everyone wants it at that point.
Yeah.
It's just hasn't traditionally
much easier
been
discussion at that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
much easier,
Yeah.
much easier.
Yeah.
And I think we traditionally haven't been there in years gone past, but we are now. And there's lots of technologies coming out. The oncology space is really exciting with what's being launched in those spaces all around the world. So I do think that there's no question those technologies where what's going to drive adoption.
Yeah, and it's an exciting time, like you say. I think the only constant in our space is change, and we've seen rapid evolution over orthopedics that is taking hold in so many other areas now. And if I look at the types of job briefs, as an agency that we take on, the types of profile of people that we're looking for, the development or the evolution, I should say, to the digital space is significant. And it's oftentimes an interesting conversation to have with a hiring manager, because oftentimes we'll go through the brief. They still don't quite understand or know or recognize what it exactly they need in that particular role with that particular profile of candidate. So it's evolving, which makes things challenging from a recruitment perspective, even more so. But
I think it's also the fact that you have hiring managers, me being a good example. When I started in MedTech, like you guys would have started in MedTech, all the navigation stuff and running all those systems, including the implant system, wasn't a thing.
That's right.
You just ran the implants. And now you need to run the nav and the robot and the implant, and it's really complex for what is the same surgery. You're still putting in a knee replacement.
Yeah.
And so the type of person you're looking for is
and what they need to know
is really digitally enabled. Lucky the younger generation are that, but it is a different profile of candidate for what was 15 years ago. They largely features, benefits, implant-based sales type of channel. It's not that anymore at all.
Does that change the way that you train your sales reps internally?
It does, in terms of what the volume of stuff they need to know is, particularly in a distribution model with multiple suppliers, is a lot, right? And so we have really formal internal training modules the team go through in each therapeutic space to make sure they're really on point with the technology we release to the market. But yes, you do need to have that sort of embedded within the organisation and do that really well, because they are expected to know a lot when they walk into a theatre now these days versus a decade ago or even 5 years ago. And that's why I think you see some companies with specialists in enabling technology
absolutely,
versus the implants team, because it does get really kind of overwhelming if you've got to get preoperative CT scans and load planning and all these things, but they're wanting the theatre to run faster and faster.
So has the expectation then of the customer changed and evolved as a result of that as well?
I think so. I think they're looking for someone that can help with making sure they've got the scans, we're preoperative planning, we're setting up the theatre, we've got minimal amount of instrumentation, so we're not over, bearing the theatre and the nursing staff, and we want it to run in a time that was 20% better than it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But all this stuff's in there. And look, for the hospitals themselves, good quality procedures done more efficiently to get through more in a day. That's a massive tick. Getting patients out faster, less invasive is a big tick. So those sort of things all help. We're seeing a rise in sort of, I guess, surgeons wanting to work in more day surgery-based hospitals too. And that's going to be an interesting change, I think, over the next 5 years. Outside of the technology space, I think like what we see in the US, this
Yeah.
kind of ASC.
ASCs,
Yeah, I think that is something that will no doubt come to this market in a much stronger way than it is today. We're already seeing it with a number of groups that are favouring certain procedures over others just because that's the model we have today. But I can see that changing too when the government, health insurers and everyone sort of catches up to what is a better way to provide value in that segment. There'll be those discussions where we can do more of that, which will be, I think, a positive.
Yeah, indeed. And it's, again, I think we're starting to see the emergence, like you say, of ASCs, surgeon-owned facilities as well. There seems to be some talk around that as well. How do you sort of foresee that changing and evolving over the next few years as well?
I think that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
I think you will have surgeons that like the idea and want to be involved in building a hospital, building a legacy outside of what they do day to day and have an interest. The younger generation definitely have a more acute interest in business. And I think they will invest in where they think they can build facilities to do what they've seen on fellowship and want to replicate here in Australia. The challenge we have is that our market doesn't operate the same way as the US. Like the
from
way
a funding perspective?
Funding perspective mainly. Yeah. So, but there's more and more hospital CEOs that I speak to that are flying to the US to see the ASC model, trying to implement it in their own hospital, or talking about the bigger groups trying to move into those spaces.
Yes, yeah.
For sure. And I think it's something that will come. And probably, in my view, definitely for the better if you can get the funding model right.
Yeah.
It gives patients more choice, and anywhere patients have more choice in the private sector can't be a bad thing.
No, exactly. Coming to your leadership journey, Paul, and something I kind of want to touch on. When you first entered into the industry, many moons ago, did you have an aspirational goal at that point that this is where you wanted to get to longer term, or has it sort of evolved over the years?
I think it's evolved over the years. No, I'm very fortunate in the role I'm in, and I'm very fortunate with the leadership team I have. They're all very capable, and it's a really great organisation. So culturally, I love what we do at LifeHealthcare, so I'm blessed that way. But no, certainly when I entered the MedTech space, I didn't have leadership aspiration. Okay. And I had to be pushed and dragged and pulled by Matt at that point in time to take more senior roles. I was really happy running New South Wales and doing a New South Wales RSM type role in spine. I love working with customers. I love being in theatre. I love that impact you could have. I even love doing the 3 a.m. trauma, although that'd probably not be as much now. Okay. But with 2 young kids. But I love that. And so I guess for me, the purpose of what we were doing, and it still resonates, it's just different when you're in a more senior role. But no, I didn't have leadership aspiration roles. And when those opportunities came along, I guess I was encouraged by my peers to take those roles on because they would prefer me to do it than potentially someone outside the organisation do it. So that was really encouraging that you had the support. And I've learnt a lot doing them. So I'm glad I have. But certainly when I entered the space, that wasn't something, I didn't sit and think I want to be a CEO. That wasn't the goal. Okay. But glad that we have the team that we have. And I'm fortunate that we've got that leadership team with so much experience. So that's helpful.
No, for sure. And, to those that are perhaps looking forward in their own careers and have aspirational goals of moving into management or indeed not. But from what you've learned over, the last few years being in management, what advice would you pass on to, leaders that are looking to move their careers forward, or indeed those that are maybe looking to move into leadership for the first time?
So to do a leadership role really well, and when I think about and reflect on the people within my team that are outstanding leaders, you have to be very selfless. It is about the team. I think where leaders want to promote their team, the performance of their team, the first ones that are aware the thing that didn't go right for a start, they'll put it on themselves to fix. But things that do go right, they'll highlight their team members. So I think they're the leaders you want. You've got to go into it with that mindset that it's about lifting everyone else up and leading from the front, particularly I think is, if you're expecting people within your team to do something, you should want to do it yourself as well. So they're things that I think you should want to do. So if you're in a role and wanting to get into leadership, it should be about that more than anything else. And if that's what you're wanting to do it for, I'd say go and chase it, because you most likely will make a really good leader within MedTech. That's probably the biggest piece of advice. And then for leaders that want to make that journey further up the food chain, it probably is similar things and similar characteristics you're looking for, but your success is driven by the success of your team at that point.
Absolutely.
So often I make decisions based off of looking at an individual that's built a culture and they've got the right team doing the right things consistently all the time. The results always come, always. So that's the person that you want. That who's going to take that next step. And we've got lots of examples at LifeHealthcare where I often say the team time's not promotion. Time doesn't equal promotion, sorry. And we've got people that have gone from clinical roles to general manager positions within 9 years and 8, 9 promotions within that time. Yeah, just because they've excelled at demonstrating all those characteristics and leadership capability. So they're probably the things that are most important.
And what would you say has been perhaps the biggest surprise to you if you reflect on your time in leadership?
Biggest surprise in terms of the space generally? Or
just, I suppose just in terms of, what you've learned over the last few years that you perhaps didn't recognise that you might by coming into a leadership role.
Probably the biggest surprise for me. It's a good question. I would suggest it's probably the value you can place on people. And if you give, often, I'm very OCD. So I guess the biggest thing I had to learn was letting go. Yeah. And I like to control things. I like to make sure I'm sort of across all the detail. But what you quickly realize is you can't do that when you've got a team of 11 that report to you, or 12, and it keeps expanding, and you actually got to let go of lots of things. Sure. And so you can only skim across the surface, and then you got to have someone that you just got to trust. Yeah. Yeah. And if you can do that well, and you can trust your team members really well, that's really empowering. And if it's empowering, they'll be engaged, and often they'll deliver the result if you've picked the right person. Yeah. Yeah. So my job isn't actually that hard. Yeah. Okay. It's just making sure I've got the right talent that you can trust, and then often they do all the doing. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've had to learn. Yeah, it's interesting. That for my nature and my personality was probably the hardest thing to change. Yeah. Yeah, I smile because I have similar conversations with my business partner all the time. Not necessarily about me, but about him. Look, I think that's really good advice. I think there might be a reluctance to delegate to certain people, a feeling, like you say, of control and ownership. But as I say, you probably, it's hard when it's your baby too, right? It's tough, yeah. When you started yourself, I think. Yeah. Naturally letting go of things. LifeHealthcare, when I came into it through an acquisition and we were building it from nothing really, it was hard to let go of certain parts of it. Yeah, yeah. But you soon learn that every time you do it, it actually works better most of the time. So if you get 8 of them right and maybe 2 of them wrong, the gain is still worth the rub. So it's just doing that more often. And so, and you just got to make sure you build the team around you that you can do that with. For sure. Yeah, no, it's really good advice. I've got one last question to finish up on, Paul, and this might be a really difficult one to actually think of a definitive response, because you've probably got so many options here. But what has been your proudest moment if you reflect on the last 15 years with LifeHealthcare? Proudest moment, look, we've done a lot. And as you reflect on the year and you sort of play out the journey we've had, there's many things that I would suggest that we've done really well, whether it's, the goal of being, with all the technologies to try to be market dominant in certain spaces because you believe you added more value to the customer than anyone else. And we did that, we achieved that. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is the team. And I say that because the team we have, there are so many people every month we celebrate for 10 or 15 years or even 20. And so they've been in the organization, they breathe the culture of LifeHealthcare, and we've been able to retain that top talent. We've got a really low top talent turnover, and it's because they all turn up and live and breathe the culture and the purpose that we have at the organisation. And so that's why I turn up every day, because I love working with the team that I have, and I love working with the extended team and all 400 plus employees that we have. I think everyone's got the same drive and same passion to do things better. And that's exciting when you have people that bring all those ideas to you all the time. It's a great place to be. So that's probably the proudest thing of what we've built, and that would then flow on to the success the organisation has had. Yeah, and then our other businesses that with Transmedic and others have a similar kind of culture when you get there. They've all got the same, they've been there for 10, 15 years. They really live and breathe it. So, and there's a reason those businesses are successful.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really important note to sort of finish on. The people are absolutely critical to the success of a business. You get that component right and do it well.
Such a relationship-based business.
Yeah, and industry as well, isn't it? You get that right, like you say, success will follow, and we see that time and time again. And it's been a privilege to be sort of part of Life Healthcare's journey over the last 5 years to be able to identify strong talent, and it is something that we take to market when talking about the business to the wider space, is how culturally strong the organisation is, and I think that is recognised with, to your point, the retention and the longevity of your key staff that you've been able to retain over the years. So, no, I think that's a really, really good point to finish on. Well, Paul, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you join us today, and really, really appreciate you being so generous with your time. I think there's a lot of key insights there that hopefully many of our listeners will find value in. It's an amazing story, your own, but also I think Life Healthcare's journey over the last 15 to 20 years. I think you'd have to say that Life Healthcare are an Australian business success story. So we wish you continued success as you move into a new financial year, and all the best for 25, 26, and look forward to seeing what you achieve over the next 12 months and beyond.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.